Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. MBOM is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at MBOM, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Mastering the Business of Yoga. I am so happy and excited that you're joining me for today's episode of the show. This episode of the podcast is brought to you in part by Offering Tree. You guys have heard so much about Offering Tree over the last couple of months and years, and it's truly because I love their platform. One of the things that I love is that they are constantly making updates and changes and listening to the feedback from the people who are actually Offering Tree users. And they've made some amazing updates over the last couple of months that I've been sharing throughout these episodes. So hopefully that's getting you excited and inspired to maybe check them out. So if it feels like you might be looking to change platforms, or maybe you're just getting started, head on over to offeringtree.com/MBOM. You could do a free trial or just purchase right from there. All right, let's dive into today's episode of the show. This week on the podcast, I'm joined by Deb Flashenberg. Deb is the founder and director of the Prenatal Yoga Center in New York City. Along with being a prenatal yoga teacher, she's also a labor support doula, Lamaze childbirth educator, mother of two, and self-proclaimed birth and anatomy geek. For the past 7 years, Deb has also greatly enjoyed being the host of the podcast Yoga Birth Babies, where she speaks with some of the world's leading experts in pregnancy, birth, breastfeeding, and parenthood. As you guys know, I had a baby at the beginning of 2022, so I have been into all things pregnancy, birth, motherhood, breastfeeding, parenthood, and so much more. So I was really excited to dive in with Deb. And in this episode, we're talking all things prenatal and postnatal, especially related to yoga and yoga business. Deb shares where her passion for perinatal support came from, what inspired her to open the Prenatal Yoga Center, why getting a prenatal yoga teacher training is a great idea for all yoga teachers and yoga educators, why prenatal and postnatal yoga could be a great niche if it's something you're passionate about like me, as well as some of the biggest business lessons she's learned through her career. So this is a really fun episode. She has a lot of great things to share. This topic is near and dear to my heart, so I really hope that you guys enjoy as much as I did. And without further ado, here is Deb. Welcome to the podcast today, Deb. I'm really excited to have you here with me today.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this conversation. And I'm curious if you can share where you're joining me from.
Sure. I am in New Jersey, South Orange, New Jersey.
Oh, amazing. Very cool. And I'm excited to dive into all things like prenatal yoga, talk about your business, all that type of stuff. But before we get to that, maybe you could share a little bit about your yoga story, your yoga journey, and what inspired you to become a yoga teacher.
Oh, absolutely. So I started off as a singer dancer, so I lived in New York City for over 20 years, and my studio is still in New York City. And I was always, flexible and mobile. And I used yoga pretty often just as a warm-up. In fact, it was a choreographer that introduced me to yoga. She used it as a warm-up for performing. And then I started just to be drawn to it. Now, my little kind of dirty yoga secret is I started doing some Bikram yoga because the studio was in Midtown, where a lot of theaters and auditions are and performing rehearsal space. And I had finished a tour and everyone's like, oh, you have to meet this person. She does this hot yoga. You'd like it. So I eventually connected with this person and I started through Bikram. I just liked the heat and a lot of my community was there. But soon after, I realized it was not where I wanted to be. And then I kind of went the exact opposite way. I started to take Iyengar. I started to do Ashtanga for a while. I got certified with Shiva Ray and then Cindy Lee. So very opposite of Bikram. And I soon was realizing that instead of wanting to go to ballet class, I wanted to go to yoga class, and it was just getting to be more exciting. So I just kind of took the leap of, I think I wanted to see where this is going to go. So I was in my 20s when I signed up to do the Bikram training because I was still doing it at that point. And then after that, realizing it wasn't my calling and then jumping into other types of yoga. And I've been doing this now. Oh, let me think. I think I got my first certification in 2000. So I've been doing it for a while, but I probably started maybe 3 or 4 years before getting my certificate, maybe 5 years. I don't know. It's a little, it's a little foggy, but it's been a while.
Yeah, for sure. I hear that. I feel like once we get back into like the early 2000s, it's like, when did that happen? I'm not exactly sure, but yeah, thanks for sharing all of that. It's always really interesting for me to hear people's backgrounds. And I'm curious at what point you got interested in like prenatal, the birth world, all the work that you do within that. Was that kind of as you entered motherhood, or were you interested
Oh,
in that?
actually, not. I had been teaching. So my son is 11. My daughter just turned 9. And I've been doing prenatal yoga since 2001. So well before that. So after doing my Bikram training, where I felt kind of stuck, because if anyone knows anything about the Bikram world, there's not a lot of opportunity to deviate from the monologue. And you can't really ask the students, how are you? What do you want to work on? It's very, very kind of stuck in one lane. And I was getting very frustrated with that. So I was talking to some of the other teachers between classes one day, and someone just happened to mention, and this was back in 2000 when there wasn't a lot of yoga at that point, or prenatal yoga at that point. And someone mentioned prenatal yoga. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Because again, I was in my mid-20s, a performer. Nobody was having kids at this time of my friends. And I mentioned it to my mom, who did marketing at the time. And she just lit up. She's like, people are always pregnant. That is a great market. And I thought, okay. So I jumped into that, really not knowing a ton about the birth world or prenatal yoga. And I came back from doing a teacher training out in Seattle, and I kind of hung my shingle, and surprisingly, people showed up and worked with me. But a turning point in how I teach prenatal yoga and what excites me about teaching it was when one of my students who was doing her fellowship at one of the teaching hospitals in New York asked me to attend. She's like, have you seen births? Do you want to see some? I said, absolutely. So totally illegal, I realized now what I did. She dressed me up in scrubs, and she told everyone I was a med student so that I could go into people's births. Again, a little intrusive now in hindsight. And it was seeing births and seeing the systemic problems in our hospital system that really inspired me to not just teach yoga with modifications, but really use prenatal as a vehicle to support the pregnant person, to talk about what they can expect in most hospitals, how to prepare for this mentally and physically, how to talk to their care provider. And it really changed my whole model of what I was teaching and how I was going about it. So I'm still very thankful to that student that student of mine who invited me to pretend to be a med student, because it changed the whole trajectory of what I do.
Yeah, yeah. It's so funny to think about. Like, I feel like that just would not happen in a hospital nowadays. It'd be like,
oh,
we need to see like your credentials and like sign you in, and you have to sign a bunch of stuff. And
it was funny because they were going. So she had me scrub in for a C-section, like scrub in, which was also so interesting. And there was someone doing admin work, like taking the name of all the doctors that were attending. And so she asked me my name, and I said, like, Deb Flashenberg. She started to write down, like, no, that should not be on anything official. That just erase that. I'm just an observer. So yeah, you're totally right. Right now, that would not fly.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing though. That's really cool to hear that that's how you got into that, and that's what made you passionate. And I feel like, being new into motherhood myself and having given birth last year in early 2022, I feel like I did a lot of learning, preconception. And actually, I guess mine kind of started with my prenatal yoga teacher training, which I did back in 2015. I mean, I was in my mid-ish 20s at that point, and I knew I wasn't ready to have a baby, but I was really interested in that type of training and knowing how to support somebody if they came to my yoga class and they were pregnant, because the idea of working with somebody who was pregnant and me not knowing how to help them modify was something that was very scary for me as a new yoga teacher. And so I took a prenatal yoga teacher training very early on in my career. And I remember so much of it was like learning about birth. And I think that's the first time that I started really thinking about like how, what happens to the body and everything the body goes through, and learning like, oh, all of your organs like move up and your lungs are smaller and you can't breathe as well and your stomach's smaller, and just being like, whoa, this is like so interesting and cool. Like I'd never thought about anything outside of, I guess, like an epidural, hospital birth, all that type of stuff prior to that. And then that training just really kind of gave me a 360 on like the entire process of birth, which set me down a trajectory, which led to my own birth. So it's really cool how learning about that can just really impact us and kind of change the way we view it.
That's actually something I have when we do our teacher training. A huge part is childbirth education. I think that comes from, I was a doula for 10 years and a Lamaze teacher. So I want to integrate that. But a lot of times I ask the students, it's one of their ending assignments, is how has your view of birth changed after this course? And you are spot on with all of them saying, my whole lens has changed, because we go so far beyond what we see in the movies. Like we talk about the anatomy, we talk about the physiological changes, we talk about hospital births and home births and birth centers, and we just uncover so much of what most people don't learn, or even if they learn, when they're pregnant. And then we as teachers can help our students who may not have that information. So I'm thrilled to hear that was part of your teacher training, that you went that far into the birth world, because I think it's a vital part of supporting people in the perinatal community.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the woman who taught it was really great. And her kind of perspective was like, everyone here is a yoga teacher. You guys know how to teach yoga. So what you need to understand is what's happening to the body of somebody who's pregnant, right? It's like, we kind of have to understand that so that we can really teach to them. And I remember teaching, I ended up subbing a prenatal class kind of soon after that, and still feeling like quite uncomfortable because it wasn't I hadn't had that experience for myself now, but just coming back to everything I was taught, like, okay, these women are on average kind of around 6 months pregnant, they have all this extra weight on them. They've got these big bellies. Okay. How do I teach something that's a bit more comfortable for them? And now that I've been pregnant, I'm like, okay, I feel like I get it a little bit more. I feel like having that firsthand experience is really helpful. But at the same time, we don't need that to teach it, right? It's like we just have to understand what's happening in the body at that time, which is so different from just kind of the average day-to-day, life that we're living.
Yeah. And I also think I think that when people look at their students, they get a lot of information. So like I was teaching prenatal for 10 years before I had my own child. And I feel like what taught me how to really teach prenatal wasn't necessarily my pregnancies, because I came from a really flexible body and I was quite comfortable through my pregnancies, which I know is not the case. And so if you're out there pregnant and you're really uncomfortable, please don't hate me, but I was really comfortable. It was looking at my students and seeing how they were moving and how they felt, and then also listening to what their concerns were. I feel like whether it's a prenatal class or not, having the students almost be the teacher in a sense and reflect back is a huge gift and a great tool for teaching.
Hey, yoga teachers, we're just taking a quick break from the podcast to talk about Offering Tree. Now, if you've been listening to the show over the last couple of months, the last couple of years, you've heard a lot about Offering Tree. I've shared with you a lot about the features, the pricing, the benefits, and today I want to talk about the education that they offer. And you might be wondering, like, what are you talking about, Amanda? This is a software company. But one of the things that I love about Offering Tree is that they are offering education for users. And this is not just how to do things on their platform. This is on-demand learning webinars. So Offering Tree does 1 to 2 webinars every single month with amazing yoga teachers, entrepreneurs, and coaches. Some of the people that they have had on the webinars recently are people that will be really familiar to you if you have listened to the podcast. Yoga teachers and business experts like Jules Mitchell, Ashley Hagen, Shannon Crow, Mado Hesselink, Meg Sanjamino, Rachel Scott, and more. Each expert covers a variety of topics that will help you with your yoga business and your teaching. So taking your teaching and your business to the next level. Things like building effective customer relationships, how to create an irresistible email incentive, how to clarify your offering, how to price your services, how to get started as a new yoga teacher, and so much more. If you're curious about this, you can head on over to offeringtree.com/webinars. Here lives all of the recordings for the webinars. If you'd like to learn more about the webinars, we're posting on our Instagram and email list, and Offering Tree is always sharing on theirs as well. So head on over to offeringtree.com and join their email list to learn more, or just bookmark offeringtree.com/webinars, and then you can head on over there and watch the recordings whenever you have a couple of minutes to do some learning for your business. All right, now back to the episode. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's just a general like teaching lesson, being able to teach, to real people and watch their bodies and learn how they move and see how they move into poses is like just one of the best ways to learn. I think that when people ask, especially as new yoga teachers, like, how do I get started? How do I get better? It's like, you just have to dive in and teach, right? Because you have to just learn, like, you just have to learn to watch bodies. Yeah,
exactly.
100%.
Watch the bodies, because when I'm teaching, so as mentioned, we have a prenatal yoga teacher training, and we have a lot of new teachers that take it. And I'm thrilled they are, because I think it's like you took it early, like it's an important skill to have. But there are many times some of them are closing their eyes or they're looking up. I'm like, no, you really have to look at your students. And then we don't give a script, and we don't give like, here are the sequences you're going to teach. And so I can see them struggling sometimes. And I remember one time, a little side story, one time while I was just doing work study at a Bikram studio, they were looking for a teacher on Mother's Day. And I'm like, I don't know how to do this. And I hadn't done the teacher training. And one of the teachers said, just look at your students. And when you don't remember what to say, the pose enough, just tell them where they need to move their body, and don't get so in your head. And that is something I still tell my teachers when they're new. Don't overthink it. Look at your students. They're going to tell you what you need to say. So I just think it's such an important thing to for new teachers, is really see your students in front of you.
Yeah, I love that. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about like creating your business. Like, where did the idea for Prenatal Yoga Center come from? And what was it like kind of creating that? I know you've mentioned teaching yoga and then also working as a doula. So love to hear kind of how your whole worlds came together to create what you do now.
Oh my gosh, it feels like everything kind of clapped together like a big explosion. So I became a doula after I was already teaching prenatal yoga. But at the time that I started PYC, I was still doing Bikram a little bit. I had went off to Seattle, got my prenatal training. I got together with 3 other people. I'm the only one left standing. And we opened, 2 of them were just investors. One of them was supposed to help with marketing. And at the time, I was also doing the Om Yoga training, and I was a student there at Om Yoga. This is some people that are listening may not know. It's Cindy Lee's center that is no longer in New York, but it was an amazing community. And I was really inspired by her commitment, Cindy's commitment, to make it not just a place that you pop in and do a class. Because before doing the Om Yoga, I was just doing Bikram, and it was very much, you go in, you do your class, you shower, you leave. And Cindy had this lounge that we hung out in. And it was really, the teachers were friends and the teachers were friends with the students. And it was just a beautiful community with a ton of workshops supporting different ideas of yoga. And that inspired me to make PYC not just a place that you pop in to do your class, but really build community. Now, and especially a place like New York City, so few people I feel like are actually from New York. Most people show up for, maybe a relationship or a job or a dream, and they don't have family necessarily around. And then you've just gone through this, being pregnant and having a baby. It requires support, like huge amount of support. And it can also be incredibly isolating, and it's a massive transition. So knowing that most of the folks there are not going to have their family, I wanted to really bolster up communities. So that was one inspiration. And then the other one was, again, seeing Cindy have all these workshops. I'm like, okay, I want to also have all these supporting workshops. So that's what inspired making it a one-stop shop. And that's why we offer things like childbirth education and lactation prep and newborn care, like all the side workshops to support this transition into and through pregnancy and into parenthood. So I really, and I've interviewed Cindy. I worked with her for she was leading the teacher training I took. I told her, I'm like, you hugely, her idea of Om Yoga hugely inspired what I have created. So I credit a lot to that. But yeah, that's where a lot of it came. And then the more, and this is maybe me being a little overcompensating since I hadn't had a baby. And I totally understand what you're saying. Like going through it and having your own experience does, I definitely think, put a different or sharper lens on what one teaches in prenatal yoga. It's not a requirement, but I do think it gives some insight. But because I hadn't given birth and I'd only witnessed it, I felt, and this could be my own insecurity or imposter syndrome, that if I didn't really study and know what I was talking about, then how can I present myself in front of a class as an expert? So that's what, besides the hospital experience where it's like, what is happening in this room? The being a doula was inspired by that. But then I really pulled in a lot of that information to my classes. And then again, to add that expert idea to what I was teaching, that's when I decided to become a Lamaze teacher. And then I went down to this place in Tennessee called The Farm, and I did a midwifery course. So I just kept bolstering my education to best support the studio. And I think that was also exciting to me. So I think all of those ideas built what we have now. But I really do credit a lot of the folks that supported me on my way, that inspired me.
Yeah, that's really amazing. It's awesome too that you're able to have like so many different parts of the journey too, because I feel like it's like you were saying, there's so many different elements where you can support. And I feel like the actual like physical practice of yoga is really just like one kind of pillar of support that, you know, a couple, a family, like a woman needs during their journey for pregnancy, parenthood, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's just such a huge experience. And I feel like it can also be just so isolating. I remember I had my daughter in a really cold winter and I was literally isolated inside. You know, my pediatrician's like, you cannot take her out in this weather. And so it's just very isolating. So now at least we're online. So days that I know students can't make it, we're also online. So that at least breaks down some of the walls.
Yeah, for sure. I know I did like a prenatal or like a birthing course. My husband and I actually did 2 of them prior to giving birth. One was where I live in Mexico, so in Spanish, and the other one was with somebody who's where I'm from in Canada in English. So it was helpful to have both of those aspects with things. And then also did prenatal yoga, and my prenatal yoga was online, which was actually really amazing because during those last like few months / weeks of pregnancy, I really don't know that I would have gotten to a class had I had to like put on clothes and leave the house. It was so nice to just like show up in my pajamas. There was no judgment.
I have a question for you, and I hope you don't mind, I throw this at you. But so you took one class in Mexico and one in Canada. Did you notice a difference in any of the teachings?
So the culture around birth is quite different in Mexico. They have, you know, a heavy rate of hospital births and C-sections, which was not the route I wanted to go. So part of my like journey, once I found out I was pregnant, we decided that we wanted to stay in Mexico to have the baby, was finding a midwife that I connected with. And so it's actually part of the reason that we ended up in the city that we live in. We'd been here before. We liked the city, but I found a midwife that I felt really aligned with who had a birthing center. And so we actually made a trip from another city that we were living in to meet her, to see her space and whatnot. And I just felt very aligned with everything she offered. And we ended up doing the course that we did here through her birthing center. So in that regard, I felt like it was like very aligned for what I needed. She talks about, you know, all different types of births that can happen. She'll deliver babies in hospitals and stuff like that. But she is definitely trying to change the culture, shift the culture here around just like, oh, the baby's not coming right away, C-section. Like, oh, you've been in here too long, C-section. Oh, you know, pushing is intense, C-section, which I really appreciated because that's not the culture that I feel super aligned with. And I think that people who are giving birth should choose their own journey. And for me, I knew that the journey was ideally, unless there was an emergency, not to be in a hospital and have a C-section.
That's fantastic. Again, I know this is the interview for me, but I'm so curious. How did the Canadian one compare? Was it more medical, or is it just as open?
So actually, I found a woman who like free birthed her baby. And so she was even a little bit more, I knew I wanted somebody to attend my birth. I'd never given birth before. And I just felt like knowing myself that, if anything was happening that I was like uncomfortable with, I'd probably freak myself out and worry about myself and the baby. So I wanted somebody who was very skilled, but also very aligned with me. But hearing her journey was like really, really beautiful. And just the way she leaned into trust with herself, her body, her baby. So I feel like that course was actually quite a bit more radical than like the experience we had in Mexico. But both were really beautiful in their own way and super educational. And I really appreciated that both of them were able to kind of identify, this is when, we should go to a hospital. This is like when it's good to have medical intervention. These are things that maybe we don't have to have that type of thing for. So they both gave me really good insight and food for thought. And I think at the end of the day, the one that was more the woman who free birthed, she wasn't pushing that on anyone. So she was very much in support of like, however you choose to journey. But what she was trying to teach was around like the physiological birth and teaching women how like our hormones and our bodies and our babies know everything that they need to do, and teaching us what that process was like if you allow it to happen. So I really loved learning about that.
I love that you also were talking about she wasn't pushing her agenda. And I think that is so important when it comes to a prenatal class or a childbirth education class. And this is something we really value. It's offering information. And I'm a stickler for evidence-based information and support so that the pregnant person can make their own decision, because it's so easy to get caught up in just saying like, okay, care provider, I will do whatever you say. And then that's where birth trauma happens. I was just preparing for a podcast on birth trauma, and a statistic I found that was staggering was 45% of people postpartum will say some part of their birth was traumatic. That is a huge, huge number. And so in preparing for this, I started to look up, why is that? And another study I found said, when people have more autonomy, then the birth trauma rate is going to drop. So kind of coming back to what you said is, when people can start to really think about what's best for them and put that thought into where do I feel safest? Who do I want there? What information really resonates with me? I think that is so valuable. So I was thrilled to hear about your birth courses. And again, it's just something that so aligns with me, because that's what we want to teach. It's not how I birthed, because I birthed my way, but that doesn't mean that's going to be how someone else wants to birth. I think our job as teachers, especially prenatal teachers, is just to highlight options. And it sounds like you definitely had that.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love that like philosophy of things. And I'm very much in agreement with that. I think that the most important thing for the person who's birthing is that they feel comfortable. And I know we did some of our medical care in Canada because we were back, for part of my pregnancy. And I have a general practitioner in Canada, and in their clinic, they have a labor and delivery doctor. And so my care was under him for a couple of months, and he was really great. I don't think I would have delivered with him. And part of that reason was that he was like, it might be me or it might be who's ever on staff when you go into labor. And for me, I was very much like, well, this is a very intimate, it's a very intense experience. And I want to have a relationship with the person who's going to be there. I want to feel like there's full trust for me. If somebody says like, hey, we need to do this, that, one, I'm educated enough that I can be a part of that decision and trust that that's the right decision, but also that it's not just somebody that I've just met and I'm like, wait, what are we doing? It's a very vulnerable time. And so for me, that was why I think we met my midwife when I was like 11 weeks pregnant, and we worked with her through the entirety of my pregnancy. And I would ideally like to, if we decide to have a second baby, which we're leaning towards doing that in the future, I would really like to deliver with her again, because we already have that rapport, right? And I think for me, that was super important.
Yeah, I had the same midwife and doula for both my kids. It was very special because then when I had some fears that came up in my first birth, I was able to talk to her because she was there. She understood where I was coming from. So we did have that relationship. It was actually very helpful.
Yeah, I think it's so important. I think now that I've actually gone through the birthing process, I'm like, okay, yeah, there was definitely like moments during my birth where I was like, I was on a different planet. I was in a different space. And thankfully, we had a very beautiful, safe home birth and everything went really well. There was no complications. Baby and I were both great and stuff. But, had there been something that had come up or I had needed to be transferred to a hospital, I was not in the state of mind to, I think, have a discussion about that. Right. So I needed to like lean in, fully trust that like my husband had that conversation with the midwife and that we knew that she like was fully aligned with our birth plan, with our wants. And I did feel that with her. And I just think that that's so important. You have to have that like full trust in whoever is supporting you with your birth.
I 100% agree. Yes.
Oh, I love it. I love talking about this stuff. I want to get back to or loop back around to talking about.
I know we went off on a tangent.
No. And hopefully people who are listening to this feel like it's interesting and valuable too. I'm sure that lots of people are interested in birth if they choose to listen to this podcast episode. So hopefully it'll be insightful for them. But I'm curious if we can talk about, the niche of pre and postnatal yoga specifically and just working with this group of people, because you mentioned before that this is a great niche because people are consistently getting pregnant. I guess one thing about it is
that's the good or the bad. They're consistently getting pregnant, but then they go away.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to kind of dive into a little bit around like why this is a great niche, and maybe for anyone who's kind of interested in this, maybe they are just passionate about babies, or maybe they've been a mother and they're like, I'd love to support other people entering into parenthood and motherhood and stuff like that. Why it's a good niche for yoga teachers to consider.
Well, first of all, I think it's a great niche. Obviously, I built my whole career in it, but you did also hit it. Like it's a tough niche in the fact that you're constantly marketing. So as I was preparing for our talk today, I thought about this, and I thought some of my teachers I'd been with for years. Now, what's on the other end, and a lot of my students, I'm not with them for years. Now, that said, I do have some that stay in postnatal yoga for years, because once postnatal, they're always postnatal, and like literally years and years. But then what was really fun, like yesterday's class, it was a hybrid. I had some online, some in studio. Two of the folks that were online, they'd only seen each other online, and they're both having their second baby. So they come back and they're like, hey, Lena. And I was like, hey, Melissa. And it was really cute. So while they don't stay with me for years, most they come back. So you get some loyalty. But I think the reason I think it's such a great niche is a couple of reasons. One, I think, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, I think it can really test your skills as a yoga teacher, as well as improve and really sharpen your skills. Because at least in the way that we teach at PYC is it's really flexible. Like, so we have a basic class outline, but you can't really go into class totally planned. Like I know when I used to teach at Ohm, I had a pretty strong structure. I don't teach that way anymore, but I had a pretty strong structure of like, this is the peak pose we're going to, here are the ingredients to get there. All right, that's what we're doing. But when we're teaching prenatal yoga, we always start with circle time. So we're going to go around the room and hear everyone's aches and pains, where they are in their pregnancy, and what they want to work on. So I have this skeleton outline of class, like Dharma talk, restorative, warm-up vinyasa, about half an hour vinyasa flow, and then start to cool it down. So I have that, but I have to think more or less on the fly of how to teach, because if I go in thinking, let's work on Ustrasana, let's do chest opening, and they're all saying, well, my lower back hurts, I want to work on hips. It's not for me to say, okay, hear what you're saying, but it's more about me. It's not that. So I think it's a great niche because it's going to teach someone to really be flexible with their class plan and think on the fly, which I think is really important. And just, again, sharpen their skills. I also think it's great for marketability, because if you're in a market where there's a ton of yoga teachers, but not a ton of prenatal yoga teachers, then you can start teaching group classes and privates. I think one of the reasons my studio has survived all these years in New York City is because when I opened, I didn't want to compete. And this was very, very conscious. I didn't want to compete. So back in when I opened the studio, 2002, gosh, that was forever ago. We had some big studios. Some of these are gone, but like Jiva Mukti and Yoga Works and Om Yoga, like we had some big foundational studios, and I didn't want to have to compete with that. I couldn't compete with that. But if I niched down and really became an expert and drew the people that may not necessarily fit in those big spaces, that was going to succeed. And I was going to offer class times that were prime times that a regular studio wanted for their general population. So I think it's a great marketing tool to help like serve the underserved population and then get more group classes, because your regular pregnant person is probably not going to keep going to their regular class. And then it's great for private. So marketability. And then if someone does know how to teach pre and postnatal and they are teaching an open level class and they have that skill, I think it's something that the other students in class could be really impressed with, that teacher's ability to be inclusive as well as work with someone's needs. That's like kind of like a 2-ring circus. You can teach and offer the modifications for the pregnant person as well as teach your general class. And I think that can bring a sense of confidence that the other teacher's like, wow, that's a really skilled teacher. So I think there's a lot of great reasons to get a pre and postnatal certification under one's belt. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I love that. And there's a couple things I want to touch on with that. But before we get there, one of the things I was curious about is kind of like what I did with my training, where it's like I came out of my 200-hour, I wasn't taught anything about prenatal. And then I think maybe I did like subbed a class where there was like, a prego mama there. And I was like, oh, don't ask me anything. I have no idea. Like, I knew very basics, like we don't twist across the belly, but I really didn't know how to adapt for her. And it made me very nervous to have her in class because I felt a certain level of responsibility. Do you recommend like all yoga teachers get a training just so that they can be comfortable with having, diverse people coming through your classes?
I do. In fact, I'm not shamelessly plugging, but I kind of am. So because of this, I know not everyone's going to invest in a whole 85-hour teacher training. One, it's a lot of time and it can be a lot of money. So because of that idea, and I was there, I remember coming out of the Bikram training, which really does very little beyond the monologue, and having some pregnant students in class being terrified. I'm like, I don't know how to help you. So I came up with an online workshop or online teacher course. I think it gives you like 5 or 6 credits through Yoga Alliance, called Who's Afraid of the Pregnant Yogi? And it is for the general teacher, the open population teacher, to have some skills for when their pregnant person strolls in the room, and instead of freaking out, because again, I've been there, it sounds like you were there, and ignoring that person or focusing so much on that person that everyone else is like, this is not a prenatal class, that they have some skills. So if someone doesn't want to invest in the whole 85-hour, then I do recommend either my course or someone else's course, but just have some skills. So again, you're not likely hurting the baby, but there are poses that it can make someone that's pregnant actually more uncomfortable, like specifically the sacroiliac joint and pelvic issues. There are some yoga poses that we have to modify for those with pelvic issues, because some of the yoga poses can worsen it and then they walk out of class feeling worse, or they could affect the pelvic floor or diastasis. So I really, really, really do think that yoga teachers should have something. And I was just having a conversation with another yoga teacher who said, and I'm not 100% sure if this is correct, that Yoga Alliance is taking prenatal out of their 200-hour trainings, which feels really ridiculous, because then what's someone going to do if they do have someone in class that's pregnant?
Yeah, that's really interesting that they would be doing that. Hopefully that's not actually the case, but
hopefully that's not accurate.
Or hopefully teacher trainers will recognize that it's actually something that is important and just included in their programs anyways. But I'm so grateful that you shared that, because I think that that's really amazing. Like, I love the idea of, diving deeper, like an 85-hour course, which can really help you if this is something you want to niche down in. But if it's not something you want to niche down in and you're just teaching to the general public, like you said, I think at a certain point, pregnant people like to be in those prenatal classes because it's a little slower. It can really focus on how they're feeling. It gives you a bit of community. I know that's definitely how I was while I was pregnant, but there's also people who just want to go to their regular class and, making sure that they are feeling good, that they're safe, that they have the modifications that they need, et cetera, I think is just a little bit more comfortable as the teacher.
Yeah. And that's why I named it Who's Afraid of the Pregnant Yogi, because I was.
I feel like that's so accurate. I was like, oh yeah, that's like exactly how I felt. 100%. So one thing I wanted to loop back around to what you were talking about with why it's a great niche is around, and I was just thinking about, the woman that I did my prenatal with, and I actually did prenatal and then postnatal with her. And then I did some mom and baby. And unfortunately, the mom and baby kind of stopped once all of our babies started crawling because we were online and the babies would just crawl and grab the computer, iPad, or they'd crawl away and then we'd be chasing after them. And I practiced mostly with her online, but I had a chance to go to her studio and meet her in person. And she was telling me like, oh, it very much comes in waves. Like the group that I was a part of, there just happened to be a pretty solid group of us that were all delivering right around probably like 2 months from each other. And so she was able to kind of create these programs for us where it's like, okay, now they've all delivered. They're a couple months postpartum. We can do some like postpartum, healing and yoga work and stuff like that. And okay, now we can bring the babies in because they're a couple months old, et cetera, et cetera. But she was saying, now I only have like, 1 or 2 mamas and I'm looking for, more people who want to kind of join. And it's just a matter of like finding those people so that I can have that group again. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts around that, because obviously great niche because people are constantly getting pregnant, but at the same time challenging because pregnancy is only, 9-10 months. So people obviously phase out of it. Return customers, like you said, is great, but we have to continuously be like finding those people because there is that.
Well, that's it. I'm continuously marketing. And that's why when I moved out of New York City to New Jersey, and I'm only like 30 minutes on the train away, so it's not that far. But when I moved out of the city, everyone's like, oh, so are you going to close PYC on the Upper West Side and open it in New Jersey? I'm like, absolutely not. Because one of the things I think that's made it successful through all these years is you need to have a really dense population. So if I was doing this here in the suburbs, it's just not dense enough to cast my net and get enough pregnant people. So I think for those out there, think about, do you have enough people to sustain it? And, are you in a really small area? Can you get more people to come to you if you are in a small area, like get many towns involved? So I think it's constant marketing, networking, and making sure you have enough population to do it. I mean, then the other side of it is do it online where the population is unlimited. Then that's going to be marketing. So that is something that we are always planning. So like when you think of the business side, I'm always planning out. I plan 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year so that my marketing doesn't stop. There are more like high birth seasons. And I need to prepare for that and recognize I'll probably have a little boost in postnatal, which makes me aware that then I really have to ramp up getting more pregnant folks in. But I definitely think the constant marketing is a part of teaching prenatal yoga.
Yeah, for sure. That definitely makes sense. I'm curious what the birthing seasons are. I've wondered if humans have those because all animals do. It seems like we just give birth constantly, but
yeah. So this summer, like June, July is a really big birth season. And it's funny because if you think about that, it marks back to September, October, which makes sense. People like finish their fun summer. They're like, okay, let's do this. Or it's also right after New Year's. So what is that then? I think that's around October, November. I think it's October, November-ish. So it's interesting.
Oh, like they get pregnant in January.
Yeah, they do. Like, okay, we're going to start the new year. Let's get pregnant. So I did know, those tend to be kind of the birth slumps. So then we tend to know, okay, so come September tends to be a low prenatal time because everyone's had their babies in the summer. So then I really ramp up my marketing July, August, knowing that September is going to be a little bit lower. So it's just interesting kind of prepping for that.
Okay. Yeah, that's super interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I've always wondered about that. I'm curious if this is just kind of a little bit, more high level and just, backing up a little bit with your journey, but do you have any kind of top business lessons that you've learned through your career and just running through your business that you want to share with listeners today?
Yeah, and first of all, learn from your mistakes because my degree is in musical theater. I started off at a small liberal arts school called Bard College, where it's a double major of theater dance and oil painting. So I have no business background, and then I transferred to the Boston Conservatory, where I have a BFA in musical theater. So I learned a lot on the fly, and I feel like learning from one's mistakes, recognizing when I did something wrong. I think that is a huge lesson I've learned. And then because I started very much on my own in a sense, I think there's huge value in getting a really good team. And then once you have that team, really having clarity in everyone's roles, and first of all, valuing your team and making sure they feel appreciated so they stick around, and maintaining really good communication, and then having things really set out with clarity. So we have a huge manual for how to run the studio so that should, team members leave, it's really clear how to train them. I think training someone's incredibly important. And so everything has systems. We've really set systems so that we are training new people. This is how we do it. And it's not really open for confusion because it's really laid out. So good communication, have a great team, make sure that people are trained well. And I'd also say, as I mentioned earlier, planning, not just doing this took me a little bit of time too. I tended to be in the beginning very reactive. Oh my gosh, our numbers are low. What do I do next? Or, oh, I just saw that so-and-so was doing some sort of challenge. We got to do a challenge. So I'm quite the planner. I think that's my Capricorn rising. I really like things well planned out. So I will do a 3 months, as it's a 6 month, 9 month, a year. And then I even have like what I call my 5-year vision of where I'm hoping to be in 5 years, and then reverse engineering, how are we getting there? So I think planning is also incredibly important. Then I'd also say another good business tip is I'm hoping someone, when they're opening their business, they're really passionate and curious about their business, because if not, it's going to feel a lot more tedious to keep showing up, very arduous each day to really baby that business. Like, I think my kids have even told me, like, my studio is like my first child. And I'm like, I think there's truth to that. It continues to need support like a toddler in a way. So yeah, I think those are probably my top lessons is plan, team, know when you make mistakes, admit your mistakes, learn from them, be passionate and curious.
Yeah, those are all really amazing. So thank you so much for sharing those. I'm curious if there's anything else you want to share with listeners today before we wrap up.
I guess it's kind of back to what we had talked about. Just don't be afraid of the pregnant student. Like, they want to learn, and there's a lot to learn from them. And if it's a journey you're excited to go on, it can be really life-changing for your students. If you choose to teach and support the perinatal community, you're really showing up at a very vulnerable, sensitive time. And you can offer a huge service to them that really impacts them. And I think there's something really beautiful and special about that.
I really love that. And I think just having gone through the journey so recently myself, I can really testify that is super true. Like, I think for me, I was really seeking that community. I was in a new city and I didn't have that many friends, and I was big and kind of uncomfortable and didn't really feel like leaving the house that much, and being able to find a community that could support me for all of my needs, and to have that space to connect with, like, oh yeah, my back's a little achy today, et cetera, was really, really amazing. So I do love that. And I also really love the fact that you've got, a little bit of support for people who just want to teach regular drop-in classes, but also support the pregnant folks that are passing through. So with that in mind, can you share where people can go to find all your information, find you online, learn with you, all that good stuff?
Yeah. Thank you so much for offering that. Yes, Prenatal Yoga Center is my website, and we offer 4 prenatal yoga teacher trainings a year. So 2 are in New York. Those are always in the early fall and springs when we're not dealing with bad weather. And then 2 are online. It's a 3-month program, but we meet for 2 full live weekends. And what's been so fun that it's online is we've had people from all over the world. Like, we just finished it a couple weeks ago, our January, February. We had someone from Australia doing it. I don't know how she pulled it off because I think she was like 16 hours ahead. And then in the training before the November, December one, we had 2 people from South Africa and 1 from Dubai. And we've had multiple people from different countries in Europe, someone from Mexico, some from Costa Rica, several from Canada. So the online is it's such a juicy, great opportunity. So we have 2 online. We also once a year do an online postnatal teacher training. So people can find that also on Prenatal Yoga Center. And then those other courses I mentioned, like Who's Afraid of the Pregnant Yogi, again, everything's on my website. And then I have a podcast, Yoga Birth Babies. So if people listen to this, they're like, ooh, tell me more about birth and babies. And yoga, you can listen to that. And all our social media is also Prenatal Yoga Center.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. We'll make sure there's links for that in the show notes. And thank you for this conversation. This has just been really amazing. I feel like this is definitely one of my passions. So really, really grateful to chat with you today.
Thanks so much, Amanda.
All right, friend, I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast with Deb Flashenberg. Definitely make sure that you go check her out, give her a follow, and check out some of her programs. Like we talked about in the episode, even if you're not interested in niching down into prenatal, this is a training that can be super valuable for you if you're teaching public classes where somebody who's pregnant might walk into the room unexpectedly. So definitely go check out what she has to offer if that's of interest to you. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for being here. And of course, a big thank you to Offering Tree for sponsoring this episode of the show. You guys make sure you go give them some love. offeringtree.com/MBOM. And if you have any questions about anything we talked about today, Offering Tree or anything yoga business related, please don't be a stranger. Would love to hear from you. All right, that's all from me. I will see you next week. Bye for now. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badasses. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please make sure you reach out to me at info@mbomyoga.com. And last of all, if you enjoyed this episode of the show, please make sure you hit subscribe and leave a review for the podcast. It would mean the world. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.